Mr. Donfried, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for the invitation and for warm hospitality here in Berlin. Although the climate is rather cold, but the hospitality of ICD was so warm that I can forget the cold climate of Berlin. Especially in my country, it's not much better. I came from Maribor. It's a city 1,000 kilometers south of here, but it's even colder than here. So I don't regret coming to Berlin. I intend to speak today about economic recovery and about the role of diplomacy in the process of economic recovery. And there are a few questions that I would like to address, and the same are the questions with which I would like to provoke your minds in order to think about the economic crisis, the economic recovery, and if there anything that diplomacy can do in this way. The first question that I'm addressing is the question of economic paradigm. Now, when we are facing with the economic crisis and when we are on the eve of depression, the question is, shall we come out with a completely new economic paradigm, or it will be just a return of Keynesianism, which have been very successful in a similar economic depression in 1930s. My second question is about the Washington Consensus. The main basics for the economic transitions and also the main paradigm for economic policy in the 90s was the Washington Consensus. But my question is, was the Washington Consensus avoidable? And I would like to illustrate that question with my view and my experience with the Slovenian case. And my third question is, what is the challenge for diplomacy in the process of economic recovery? The turmoil on the financial markets shook the confidence into the old economic paradigm. The economic paradigm, which could be framed with the word deregulation, privatization, liberalization, was the main way of economic thinking. And I must say it has been also a very successful way. If we remember the oil crisis in 1970s, the following stagflation and the impotence of economic policy of the 70s, and then the Reaganomics, the return towards neoliberalism and neoclassical paradigm, it was a rather successful strategy in economic policy. But it seems but the new crisis, the crisis in 2008, proved that this paradigm has been exhausted. Professor Lucas seemed to be too optimistic when he, in 2003, stated that the main problem of preventing depression has been solved for all practical purposes. Professor Krugman, for instance, was much more skeptical, and all the time he wrote about economics of depression, and in the last issue of his work in 2009, he finally got the proof that economic of depression is not yet out of date, and the economic depression is still a very actual fear for all the developed and other economies. But my question is where are the alternatives? First of all, I would like to speak about alternatives to liberalism, because since Adam Smith, there is no realistic alternative to liberalism. And our experience from the 20th century, especially from the first half of 20th century, when some government tried to find the way out of the depression with non-liberalistic in the framework of non-liberalistic system and philosophy, it all ended with a catastrophe. If we mention the Italian fascism, the Nazism, or the communism, they all are doctrines which denied the basic liberal democratic principles and the basic principles of Western Enlightenment. And they all ended in a turmoil. So, whatever solution we can find for the economic paradigm, we must consider that human beings, they have their rights. They have also the right to be to have their private property. They have the right to movement. They have the right of free entrepreneurship, and I think that the main framework of liberalism and of the liberal democratic system is to be kept, and that Adam Smith was right that there is no alternative. But the problem that are arising and that sometimes also provoking doubt into the liberalism, the problem are connected with the markets where the products are not transparent, or where the competition is far from the perfect competition. In such cases, the market doesn't work properly. The market doesn't price a productive behavior, and these are, I would say, the marginal cases that must be solved in the framework of general open market and open society. As we found, and in the latest economic crisis, there were some sophisticated financial products that were bound to subprime mortgage loans, and they were not transparent enough. And on the financial markets, there are many similar products that present an imminent risk of inflating market bubbles. And when market bubbles burst, we are facing the problems, and those problems are bringing also doubts about market economy. But as I said, the new paradigm there are some questions that the new paradigm should address. The first question is the problem of transparency on the markets. It seems that a certain degree of regulation is necessary. Although the regulation should be introduced only when it is necessary, only when the products are not transparent, and where the competition cannot choose the best solutions out of the many suppliers on the market. I think that the neoliberal economic paradigm addressed the problem of competition. The problem of competition was emphasized, but the problem of market transparency was a kind of neglected. And this is so the main problem of the new economic era. Then we should like to put the stress on the problem of employment. Since 1946, when the United States Congress adopted a law on employment, where they stated that the main goal of the government is full employment. Since that time, in many cases, that goal was forgotten. But if we live in a system where most of population depends on the earnings they get, it also means that we cannot accept unemployment in a large scale. So, nevertheless, full employment or the situation near full employment must be an important goal of economic policy. Of course, not neglecting other goals as price stability and GDP growth. But we must know that that unemployment in a larger scale can spoil all other parts of the market, and what is much more severe, higher unemployment can bring can lose credibility into the market solution, and it eventually leads to irrational decisions also by the voters. We know very well the case of 1933 in Germany. And the problem of employment is closely connected with the aggregate demand. And here we have some solutions that were developed by Keynes. So regarding Keynes, I can say that he might be, in certain degree, helpful again. But I wouldn't say that it is a return to Keynesianism and return to hyper-institutionalization and the bureaucratic states that had important rule before 1970s. But the Keynesian emphasis on employment and aggregate demand is something that we must consider also in the new economic paradigm. And I should address also the problem of international cooperation. In the 90s, we had some economic crises, but they were just regional crises. We had the Eastern European crisis, we had the Mexican crisis, we had the Asian crisis, but none of those crises spread around the world. So I think it was also one of the reasons why some economists were so complacent to say that a problem of global economic depression is solved for any practical purposes. But now we are facing with the global crisis and with the threat of global depression. So also the solution must be global. And the only way to come out with the global solution are in international cooperation. Even coordinating economic policy is necessary in order to save the global nature and the global problem of the recent economic recession. And now, of course, we are in the period when we are somehow leaving the paradigm of Washington consensus. The question is Washington consensus avoidable? Because at the end of the 80s, when a Washington consensus was accepted, it was the highest point of neoliberalism. It seems to be a great victory for the radical liberal system, and also the 90s were for the most of the world very successful. But is the Washington consensus avoidable? Was it avoidable? And can we find sound alternatives? Professor Stiglitz used to compare the economic performance of Argentina and Chile. While Argentina strictly executed the rules of IMF, thus the Washington consensus, Chile was much more successful. So it was the case comparing Argentina to Chile was also a case against against strict execution of Washington consensus. Also, the Washington consensus was the main inspiration for all countries in transition, but there were many differences in particular countries in the degree of resemblance with the Washington consensus. I am very familiar with the Slovenian case because I had the privilege to take active role in the earliest stages of Slovenian transitions. And if now I look backward, I see that in Slovenia we made significant deviations from Washington consensus toward Keynesianism, and those deviations were successful, although they were actually not deliberately chosen. When we worked on Slovenian transition, there was no other reliable sources how to do it than Washington consensus. But when we had to find the pragmatical day-to-day solutions, sometimes the recipe of Washington consensus didn't work. We simply couldn't do it. We found out our instinct showed that sometimes we must make some deviations from Washington consensus in order to maintain well-functioning economy. And it seemed that the Slovenian transition model mix had a favorable influence on economic performance and on the social integrity. So we must know that nobody cited Keynes during Slovenian transition, and the only actual source was the Washington consensus. But when now I look back and when I compare the Slovenian transition with some theoretical classifications of development strategy, I must see that in Slovenian transition there were many elements of Keynesian and post-Keynesian economics, no matter that they were not deliberately chosen, they were just the result of pragmatic solutions of day-to-day problem. For instance, to assure a stable aggregate demand was far beyond the scope of neoclassical reform recommendation. But in Slovenia, on one hand, the government made a failure in the attempt to control wages. In 1993, in order to stop inflation, government also tried to freeze the wages, but it was rejected by the parliament, and the result was another push in wage growth, which is of course against any recommendation of neoclassical paradigm or Washington consensus. But the result was the push in wages enabled enough aggregate demand of domestic sources. And so when in 1993 Europe came out from the recession, also Slovenia was recovering thanks to enough domestic demand. On the other hand, Slovenia also did some exceptions in the monetary system and in the currency policy. Slovenia didn't accept the currency board because Slovenia is a small and export-oriented economy. So export demand has also a very important influence to Slovenian economics. And so the Slovenian National Bank artificially ran the policy of depreciation of domestic currency in order to assure satisfactory foreign demand for Slovenian goods. Of course, it contributed to inflation, and Slovenia was faced with moderate inflation until Slovenia joined European Union. But on the other hand, that was a policy of maintaining aggregate demand, domestic demand with wage growth, and export demand with the depreciation of national currency. And it was it was successful. When I tried to compare, to classify, to make analysis of Slovenian transition and compare it to some classifications of Marangos, I found out that Slovenian transition was consisted of both paradigms, of neoclassical paradigm with monetary reform, with independent central bank, with introducing convertibility, with floating exchange rate, with liberalization of imports, with balanced budget policy. But on the other hand, in Slovenian transition, we had many Keynesian elements. So the tolerance towards wage growth and unsuccessful attempts to control wages, then the controlled depreciation of the currency, and to maintain till entering European Union, to maintain some control on capital transaction. It all helped to Slovenia that the process of economic transition in Slovenia ran rather smoothly. Here are some data regarding economic growth, inflation rate, wages and salaries, unemployment rate, current account, and budget deficit. And we see that from 1992 till 2008, Slovenia had a stable growth between 3 and 6% annually. And none of the local or regional recession struck Slovenia. Slovenia also didn't react to the East European recession, which was the closest in the late 90s. And also, inflation rate went down, although we had to live about 10 years with a moderate inflation. But the wages and salaries had always positive growth. Also, unemployment had a downward trend. And what is also very important, we didn't sacrifice macroeconomic stability for all that result. Current account and the budget deficit, they both were in an acceptable framework. Just the figures for 2009 are much worse, because in 2009 Slovenia was really struck by the recession, but the recession into Slovenia came through Germany, because 30% of Slovenian export is to Germany, and especially the most important Slovenian products that are exported to Germany are components for cars. And with the crisis of German car industry, also the supply to German car industries went down. And of course, there were multiplier effects to other sources. Better to say, in 2009, Slovenia was also exposed to its vulnerability, because Slovenia is export-oriented economy, and so we couldn't resist the global economic crisis. Well, so far about Slovenia. But what is the message that I want to express based on the Slovenian experience? The message is that when we are facing with the recession and with the threat of depression, a reconciliation between Friedman and Keynes is possible, and perhaps it is necessary. As the Slovenian transition shows that there can be a productive policy mix between neoclassical and Keynesian elements in economic policy. And that is also, I think, the framework of new paradigm that we should find for the 21st century. The accent on neoclassical approach was very successful after 1970s and enabled the recovery after the oil crisis and stagflation, and also enabled the vivid growth in the 90s. The emphasis was on monetarist and supply-side approach in economic policy. But on the other hand, the 2008 crisis disclosed the problem with transparency of financial markets and eventual disposure to depression. So it's my opinion that that the new economic situation calls for a kind of reconciliation between neoclassical and Keynesian paradigm in economic policy. Besides, that paradigm of economic policy that will complete the known theories will also be global, because of global nature of the crisis and possible and eventual depression. Also, the solution are only in using global instrument in preventing depression. And here we are on our last challenge, and on our last question that is to address. What is the role of diplomacy in the period when we are fighting against economic depression? As we have already stated, it is the global nature of economic depression, and also since globalization, the world is interdependent. So, on one hand, the economists must find the best solution from the technical point of view. But on the other hand, we must get consensus of the governments of the world. We must get a global consensus about the new economic paradigm and about the cooperation in fighting depression. And this is the main task for diplomacy in the when we are facing with the depression. In particular, what diplomacy can do. Also, yesterday's panel discussion showed the main role of diplomacy is in building up a confidence among the people and among the nations. And through this confidence, we can also communicate new strategies for economic policy and economic development. It is very important to prevent protectionism. We all know from all the economic theories are warning against protectionism. But on the other hand, in every country you have some domestic lobbies that can find its benefit in protectionism. But the governments must resist against protectionism, and the international activity is the only way to get arguments against protectionism also on the domestic scene. Besides, the economists should build the new system of global regulation of financial markets. But on one hand, it is the technical solution. On the other hand, it must be accepted by the governments. So it is again the role of diplomacy to negotiate, to find such a solution that are acceptable for all, and that to a new system of regulation all the countries can join. And coordinating economic policies, diplomacy is also the instrument through which economic policies can be coordinated. So diplomacy, when the Cold War ended, started also the new trend. We are not anymore in the bipolar world, which has significantly shaped the diplomacy of the 20th century. Now we live in the global world. The threats are different, and also the threat of economic depression is one of the main threats that diplomacy should address. The way how to deal with economic challenges the way has already been started. A big achievement of diplomacy was the Uruguay round and establishing a World Trade Organization, which set the basic rules that are accepted, the basic economic rules that are accepted by majority of the governments and nations. Perhaps IMF and World Bank were not so successful in put in place the new financial architecture of the world, but with the experience of 2008, of course, this is a new impetus to find and to work on the new global world global financial architecture. There are also new global instruments regarding environment, and of course, we are not living anymore in the threat of transition from a Cold War to a normal war, but we are living under threat of terrorist attacks, which is set in new political pressures. So the theories of diplomacy have already worked on many strategies that are based on the fact that the range of variety of diplomacy has greatly increased, that diplomacy penetrates deep into domestic policies, and that the range of active countries spans the entire globe, but on the other hand, the relative power of governments is shrinking. That is why, for instance, I cite Baines and Wolcock and their work, New Economic Diplomacy. They propose some new strategies. Among them, diplomacy should bring in, or diplomacy is bringing in non-state actors to spread the load of international communications from the governments also to other actors that are influential, but they are not formally included into the governments. Then, in the era of new communications, also greater transparency is asked for diplomacy. Although in some cases it can spoil negotiation, but I think that the scope of secret diplomacy became rather narrow, and the majority of diplomatic efforts and achievements are transparent. And of course, international institutions. Now, when we have a World Trade Organization, and I think it is the foundation is set for also other international institutions dealing with the economy, dealing with the measures that will prevent any future threat of depression. So, if I may sum up some conclusions, some main messages that I wanted to address to you. The first, the economic crisis opened new ways of economic thinking. Theory is faced with new challenges, although depression is already well known from the past. But there is no repeating of history. There might be some similar phenomena, but the year 2010 is not 1930, so or is not 1933. So anyhow, we know how depression works. We know also the certain measures of depression, but we must use them in the framework of new circumstances that are present in nowadays. Secondly, Keynes is cited again, but there is no return to pure Keynesianism or to extreme Keynesianism. But we must find out a possibility of new cohabitation in the framework of neoclassical synthesis. The praxis already proved the viability of some kind of synthesis. So also the theoreticians should work on a new economic paradigm which include all the experience that we have until now, including neoclassical experience and Keynesian experience in economic policy. And the third, last but not last, as the crisis is global, the solution must be global. Diplomacy will contribute to international understanding and mutual trust among the actors, developing a global economic order that will enable recovery and prevent depressions in the future. Thank you very much.